Welcome to the Intersect. This episode is a big one. We're closing out a semester that I think educators, students, and researchers will look back on as a line in the sand, a moment when AI fully entered the classroom and consumed the campus. Virtually, pun intended, every student has access to these tools now. AI has become the ultimate study partner, editor, and first draft writer. Many are worried about cheating, but more broadly about whether students are actually learning anything in this age of AI. And when school starts again in the fall, it'll be about coexisting with it, embracing it, figuring out how to use AI to support real learning, not just to shortcut the hard parts. We need to rethink quickly how to adapt our education system so it stays relevant, meaningful, and human. In this episode, I'm joined by two brilliant and grounded voices from the front lines of education who are living and working through this moment every day. Dr. Hamsa Bastani, a professor at Wharton whose recent peer-reviewed study is one of the first to show that generative AI can boost short-term performance, but also risks harming long-term learning if used as a crutch. She brings clarity and data to a conversation often clouded by panic. And Kristina Peterson, a high school English teacher and the author of AI in the Writing Workshop. She's been openly integrating AI into her teaching, using it with her students, not to replace the writing process, but to deepen their work within it. If you're a teacher, a parent, a student, or just someone wondering how we're all going to learn in the future, this is for you. Let's get into it. I'm very excited to be joined by you guys. You are out on the front lines. It is a wild west in AI education. And here at the Intersect, we've been thinking a lot about it, talking a lot about it. We have to embrace it, coexist with it. But did AI kill education? Is AI helping education? There are so many questions. Kristina, you're sitting in class. Class is still going. You've got a couple more weeks left, and you really are in it. You're teaching ninth grade English, and you have embraced AI on this journey. So tell us, so much has changed semester to semester. Place us in your world. Give us a portrait of what it's like on campus for you and your students.
Yes, I have 9 days until summer break. I have 105 freshman students at Exeter High School, and I have been teaching there for almost 20 years. And I teach a lot of authorship and writing and take my students through the writing process. So that has always been my wheelhouse. I'm not very tech savvy. But when ChatGPT was released and I started seeing all of the articles that all of us saw about it beating the LSAT and getting into the business school, I started to wonder what was going on. And I started to dig into ChatGPT as a personal account. And at first, I was really naive. I didn't think that it would find its way into my classroom because I write alongside my students and we generate in notebooks and then we take our drafts through the writing process. So I very arrogantly and naively suggested to my writing colleague that we should do a session for a New Hampshire Council of Teachers of English conference about how to bot-proof your classroom. And we thought that we would be able to easily tell everyone, if you just write alongside your students and do the writing workshop, they will never use AI. And we got the session approved, and no joke, maybe 2 weeks later, a student submitted an AI-generated poem. And I caught it because we had workshopped the previous day together in class, and I knew what he was writing, and I knew it was a countdown style poem, and I knew what it was about, and I had given him some feedback on it. But what I got was very much an AI poem. It had a rhyme scheme, it had very strange words, and it looked like an old poem. And when I confronted the student about it the next day, he very eagerly told me all about ChatGPT. And his college-age sister had told him, and he didn't see a problem with it because for him it was like a mentor text and it was just a rough draft and he wasn't going to hand it in for a final. It was just kind of helping him get his thoughts off the ground. And it was this really shocking kind of moment in my teaching life for many reasons. One, I had this presentation I was doing in a month about how students won't use AI, and here is a student using AI in my room. And two, like, did he have a point? Could we look at these AI generated pieces as a mentor text? And number three, I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my teaching days as a plagiarism investigator. I can't have that kind of relationship with my students that I am always trying to investigate. Did AI write this or did they write this? I can't be in a room with teenagers if that is what I'm looking at. So a lot changed in that moment. And the best way for me and my colleague to figure things out is to write. So we spent the next year trying to figure out if the student had something there. Could we see it as a partner instead of a threat? Could it become a tool? And if so, how? And it is still ever changing, even up until today. It's still changing.
So let's start with you, Hamsa. Would you give us a portrait, a thumbnail of what it's been like for you this last semester? How is AI impacting you in the classroom and your studies? Tell us everything.
So we've been doing a couple of studies where we're trying to examine the impact of these generative AI-based tutors, both in K through 12 classrooms as well as in universities, and whether they're actually providing this promise of these personalized tutors or whether students are just using them as a crutch to enable quicker answer machines rather than actually engaging with their classwork. And what we've been seeing is kind of a mix of both. So if you carefully implement these tutors with carefully designed guardrails, and students are encouraged to use them in meaningful ways, and teachers also engage with them in meaningful ways, we see positive results. But I think we have to be careful. At least one of the studies that we did, for example, in a Turkish high school, we saw that students that used them as a crutch to just copy answers ended up doing about almost 20% worse on the subsequent exam. And so that is a loss of critical thinking skills and skill acquisition that, long term could be very concerning. And so that's what we've really been thinking about.
So the upshot is you could have short-term gains. It'll help you pass the test, but long-term, we're not so sure ultimately if this is going to be additive for you or actually detract from your learning process. So thank you for that thumbnail. And Kristina, I think that what you said is quite profound and that you didn't want to spend the rest of your years as a teacher, as an investigator, as a plagiarism investigator. And that brings up this cheating piece. There are headlines. There are headlines everywhere that talk about cheating in AI. And I think if you're a parent and you read that, it stops you in your tracks. If you're a student and you read that, it stops you in your tracks. You're terrified. You don't want to get kicked out of school. Hamza, could you give us a little bit of background on how long ago the study was? And with the timeline that Kristina just walked us through, how does that resonate with your work?
I think that's a great question. And her kind of going back and forth resonated a lot with my experience as well. So I guess in fall 2023 is when we launched our study. And I think at that time, we very naively thought, oh my God, this technology is going to be so great. We can put, this 24/7 TA at the hands of, all kids, not just the rich and privileged ones that can afford, private school and like good faculty to student ratios, but also, underprivileged schools where maybe there's resource constraints and a lot of teacher absenteeism and these challenges. And then after doing this study, that was end of 2023, early 2024, we're looking at the results and we're like, oh no, this seems to be bad. Like a lot of kids, especially the less motivated kids, are the ones that are using this technology a lot to sort of not engage with the material, but, just kind of coast by. And at that time, the hallucination rates were also high. So a lot of them were actually turning in like incorrect answers. Since then, some of these reasoning models have come out and the hallucination rates are similar, but it gets a lot more problems correct. And it's starting to become more useful even at that like high school or university level. And so now we're more at the point where I'm not exactly like Christina said, like my job can't be to, police usage. I don't think that's healthy and establishes the right relationship with the kids, but also like they're going to be using this in their workplace. So now our thinking has very much shifted to, okay, they're going to be using this. This is going to mean that some students are going to, try to free ride off of this technology. What levers do we have access to as educators or even in the workplace where we can try to get people to engage better with these tools. So like a couple things are, for example, like the simplest one is like playing with the prompt. Like what kinds of pedagogical principles should we incorporate as guardrails to make sure that we have better outcomes? That's what we found in our study in Turkey, that like having really good guardrails, teacher designed prompt kind of mitigated a lot of the harms that was created by regular access to regular ChatGPT.
So are you saying it's a teacher created prompt and then a teacher is helping them think about how they would prompt ChatGPT?
No, the teacher actually designs a system prompt that goes into the back end. So in this particular case, the teacher actually tells GPT, like, hey, you're going to act as a tutor to the student, but that's not sufficient. For the safeguarded version, the teacher actually included the answer to the problem. They describe common mistakes that they've seen students make in this kind of problem, different incremental hints that you might offer to a student if they got stuck on those points. And so it was like a very labor intensive process, which basically encapsulated all the good tactics that a good teacher would use on a bunch of students, and then try to democratize that by giving the large language model that. So that seems to be one effective strategy. Another one is like having students just work on tasks that are more difficult that large language models get wrong, so they learn how to collaborate with it rather than to just tell them not to use it.
Kristina, you have a good example of this about working in some hallucinations with your students.
Yes,
Yeah, very,
absolutely.
very savvy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the ways I like to work with students is to show them that AI can be a thought partner and can sometimes challenge their thinking, or they can challenge its output. So, one of the first instances I do when I first start talking about AI is usually during a whole class novel unit. So, this year, my students were reading Lord of the Flies, and they had to read like chapter 3 for homework. And instead of giving them a basic comprehension reading check, I asked ChatGPT to summarize chapter 3 and ensured that a hallucination was embedded, so something that it got wrong. And maybe it was something from earlier chapter, or it mixed up a character. And then I had the students just take a highlighter and they had to highlight the hallucination. And that was a quick not only reading check to see who read, but also a way to reinforce that you can't take everything it says at face value. It will get things wrong. It's designed to please you and give you an answer. It won't say, I'm sorry, I don't know that. So that was an easy way to have them see that it can hallucinate, and it does.
Scare them just a little bit, but
A little
also,
bit,
yeah,
yeah.
just to scare them just a little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And Hamza, you talked about this, but the struggle when I think about education is being upended, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just where we are. It's not the system doesn't work for everyone. We know all of this. So the possibility of AI is great in that when you think about a personalized type education and a partner and a mentee, but we are not there yet. We know that we are in such early days. I think about what we didn't know 2 years ago and where we are now. But this idea that critical thinking, creativity, struggling, these things that we associate with education, and that it is not a simple, you memorize and then you fill out the test and then you've got it. And so both of you guys are trying to figure out how to ensure that struggle is is a part of it, because it's going to continue to change, I suppose. So yeah, I'd just love to hear from both of you guys and how you're thinking about that. And if you actually believe that is a cornerstone of learning and education, is some kind of struggle.
I 100% agree. So I think struggle is the way that, and the education and learning science literature has kind of talked about this for a long time, that, struggling and having lower performance in practice periods and having purposeful errors, that's what leads to long-term retention. When you make mistakes and you struggle through a problem, that's how you remember the concept for a long time. And so passively consuming information, I think, is one of the worst ways that we can, because it gives the illusion of learning. A lot of students sometimes perceive that they've learned a lot, but they actually can't reproduce the logic. But I think The nature of the struggle probably has to change. So what we teach in classrooms definitely has to change. I can definitely say that as a university instructor, at least. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about is that maybe problems should just get harder because a lot of the easier stuff, like if you're doing a coding assignment in Python, for example, it used to be that, you would teach students how to set up an if statement or a for loop. And now, large language models automate all of that for you. And so maybe we should be, giving students really hard problems where they can really, instead of these cookie cutter problems that's all they could solve in a reasonable period of time before, we couldn't give them longer assignments because, you know, then they would hate us. And so now we can give them much harder problems that involve more conceptual understanding, and maybe they can delegate that struggling portion to other parts. And that's what I worry about in education as well. Like a lot of the materials are online, and all of that material is exactly what large language models are trained on. So if we really believe that these models are the best coders and we don't need humans, then that's one thing. But I don't think that's actually true in practice. They're not that great at like coding in practice. They're very good at helping talented people, and they're very good at solving problems that we've talked about a million times in every textbook. And so we really want students to like make that bridge. And if that's the case, then maybe that's what we should start integrating in the classroom.
Harder, harder. Okay, that scares me, and I have some follow-up. But Christina, what do you think about? I mean, you've done a bunch of creative things to integrate AI
Mhm.
into some of the
Mhm.
hardness of
Yeah.
learning.
And I think, especially dealing with teenagers and freshmen, we want them to take risks, but I think we have to remember that just being in high school is risky for them. And many of my teenagers don't want to put themselves out there in the ways that I think a lot of us ask them to. And yes, we can say as teachers that, getting mistakes is part of the learning and you should fail, but everything else is telling them that no, they cannot fail. And many of them are overcommitted and many of them are just trying their best. And sometimes I think school's set up to make them compliant instead of curious. And I think AI can actually help break that down. And I think it's going to force us to break that because the products that AI can produce, or in my world, we call them summatives and formatives, those summatives can be beautiful, especially in writing. And the first thing I have to do is interrogate my own process because something broke along the way. I mentioned a little bit earlier that even today I'm dealing with some of these things. I have a student whose draft of a really cool fiction story was likely not her own. And the only reason I suspected was because we did an activity where we question flood in class and they don't have their computers, they
What
don't have
is
their
question
phones.
flooding? Sorry for
It's
those
this
that
cool
don't.
thing where they put everything away and you just sit with a friend or a peer and you just tell them this cool story that you're writing. And this is the coolest activity I do all year. We do an author study where you have found an allegiance to an author, many of them like Frida McFadden or Stephen King or YA novels, and you just get to write like them. And everyone is happily sharing, well, in my story, there's a ghost, or in my story, the girl wakes up and she's murdered. And it's very exciting, and they ask each other questions about the story. And it's this idea that as a writer, you're kind of talking your story out. And I had one student who couldn't remember her story at all and couldn't participate in this. And so I kind of let it go because, again, the fear of failing in front of your peers can be debilitating. But I had seen the draft and it wasn't like the greatest draft. It didn't have any red flags, but she couldn't remember. And so I had her stay after class and just questioned her outright. Did you write the draft or did you lean on some AI to write it? And she doubled down. No, I wrote it. I was really tired and I couldn't remember any detail. Not a single detail, not even a character. And no, she couldn't. So again, like, what do you do in that situation? I don't necessarily need to go out and prove, but we had a conversation about the draft. And it was very different from the student from 2 years ago who, like, no, this is a rough draft. And here's another student doubling down. I just don't remember it. And so it's very delicate and very I don't even know if nuanced is the right word. There's a lot of gray there with teachers, and for some of us, just any type of AI is full on cheating. And with others, there's a lot of pressure. The school year's ending, and this product is like 80% of their final grade. So, of course, they're going to lean on it. But if I can build in more checkpoints where the process, those things you can't fake, you can't use AI to fake a conversation as easily. Um, so if I have more of those checkpoints along the way and I can interrogate my own process, I feel like that's this one of the only solutions. But if I want them to be curious about their own learning, then we find ways of working toward some partnership where if you need some AI to support you, you just need to be transparent about that. They have to show that they've done that. Are they all being transparent? Possibly not. But I think one of the ways that teachers and maybe even parents can start to see the vision that I'm trying to articulate is if we take Bloom's taxonomy, which I feel like every educator knows this, like pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy, and we
I might
flip
need
it.
you to give me a refresher on Bloom's
It's like a
taxonomy, though.
triangle, and you have like remembering at the bottom and then like understanding, and you go up. And at the very top is this like beautiful idea of creation. And that for teachers is like what we all want students to do. We all want them to create these beautiful things. But now we have AI who can create these beautiful things. And so I think in some ways, I might have to have a backwards plan. They evaluate the output. Did it hallucinate? Was it what you wanted it to say? Is this, how can you make it your own in some ways? Can you then analyze what happened and did it meet the task? And then how can you maybe apply that to the future so you don't always have to lean on AI for that support?
Hans, I'd love for you to respond to that, but I just my own sort of perspective on hearing that. I commend you in thinking about your own process here because we are talking about it. This isn't going away, and everything has to change with it. And just I was trying to put myself in the position of that student who, I mean, we've all had not had enough time to study for the one thing, right? Like we've all experienced that where you're underprepared or I didn't quite get this assignment. Okay. And so and I keep hearing you use words that say, transparency. It's transparency from the student side about use of AI or not use of AI, transparency from the educator side. But there has to be a different way to do that assignment and entirely, and not just because it is what strikes me is your compliance word is really interesting, and I think giving the students, we don't just want them to be compliant to just get the grade. That's part of the problem of why the system is actually broken. And so reworking how that very simple checkpoint that you built in, which is discuss your story with other students, which cannot be faked, right? Yet that cannot be faked. So yeah, Hamza, what do you think about that anecdote, and does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of that lawyer who used fake citations for a court case, right? And then there was all this news coverage about it. And then I assumed that other lawyers would learn from this and it wouldn't happen again. But actually, there was a company that just created a huge database of lawyers that not we don't know how many lawyers are using, these tools, and it's fine if they're verifying them, right? But a bunch of them that actually got citations or got into trouble legally because they used, references that were hallucinated. And so we keep seeing this. And I think a key issue is this transparency thing, which I think is actually our fault. So right now, students have assignments and then they go to another platform to help them with it, right? So one of the things that we've been trying to do is provide a platform for the students, right? So like we have an interface where we say, okay, like ChatGPT is embedded into this, but that way I can monitor the prompts and what they're doing and they're typing everything or their assignments in that window. And so I can see what their prompts are. I can see what are AI completions and what are edits that they're making. And right now, we don't have a great way of like understanding that data other than uploading into ChatGPT and asking what did the student do. But I think the direction we need to go in. Because if we don't see how the students are interacting with the AI, like how can we teach them to interact better? Ultimately, they're turning in assignments. And if they are going to use AI, at least I should be able to see how they're using it.
I love that. I've seen so many headlines and just photos of the blue notebooks, and that it's like that's going to the long form writing notebooks, and like this is going to save us if we'll write everything long form in classrooms, and that to me is just you're putting your blinders on. I mean, yes, of course, I hope we can still write essays, right, and grade them without computers. That's actually not preparing them for reality. The reality is that we're all going to be using GPTs, and we already are. And so, the, how far away do you think what you just talked about, this vision of an educational platform where that's baked into the systems, not, I'm putting aside like policies and like tech rollouts and all of that kind of thing, but how far do you think we are from that? And is this something that you are, from a research perspective, looking at in terms of immediate, I would say, in the next semester or two, what are we expecting to see and what are you researching around?
So every study we've done so far, and we've done about 4 of them, we've had our own platform. It's actually not difficult to throw these together, especially with ChatGPT, because it's great at making, web apps and user interfaces and stuff like that. And so it's like a very, very simple interface. So far, I think the key challenge is being able to analyze the data that you actually get out of it, because once students know that you're monitoring their prompts, then they start sending like nonsense prompts, right? Just so that it looks like, I think it's the same thing that, tech companies mentioned. When you start compensating software engineers based on how much code they're committing, they're just going to commit a lot of code, but that might not be good code. It might not be useful code. So we need better metrics of trying to understand. And I think this is really like the big challenge ahead. It's not so much the tech challenge of getting these platforms out, but we're not at a position where we're not even at a position where we know how to teach students how to best interact with the AI. So how can we even grade their interactions with the AI, right? That's, I think, where there's like a lot of learning practices that we need to understand. Like, the one that, you mentioned was great about the identify hallucination in the book summary, right? Like that's a great learning practice. Like we should have a whole rich resource of those ideally.
What do you guys think when you go back to school next semester? I mean, Christine, you're still in it, but when we return in September, August, September, what do you what are you thinking about as next on the horizon?
Next year, my school district is unlocking Gemini for all of our students at the high school level, which will be a very big shift because I think many teachers are still in the like using AI equals cheating kind of mode. So trying to get ahead this summer on how to approach an unlocked AI, because right now they're like allowed to use school AI and I can see everything. They're not really allowed to use ChatGPT, even though they do often use it on their phones or at home. So it'll look very different when they actually have it in their like Google Suite to access. Um, and I think there will be a lot more conversations with colleagues next semester
That
that we'll have to prepare for.
I see. And so do you, I mean, I hear I hear in your voice that like we have to get our colleagues, like you've had to embrace, but does it feel like an uphill, not to out your colleagues, but does that feel like an uphill battle a bit?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the students are leading the way in many ways. And in my world, I can share my own experiences and I'm really transparent about what I'm thinking and what we're doing. But that also sometimes can be really nerve wracking because it makes you vulnerable. And I've been doing this for 17 years and I still make mistakes. And the way I handled both of my student stories, someone would say, like, there's no way you should have done that. They would have very strong opinions about these students should have failed or whatever the case is. But I think that is it's all about being human. And if we're not really combating AI, but we are in a world that is increasingly more automated, the more human and vulnerable I can be with my colleagues and my students, and the more relationships we can build with each other and hold on to those until the very end. That's what's getting me through these next 9 days. I actually really like the teenagers, and I'd rather hang with them and talk with them and the relationships I have with them. This is why I don't want to be a plagiarism investigator. I can't, that breaks my relationship with them. And then, there goes a whole year. And I truly believe that, spending a year with a really incredible teacher can change a kid's life. And I want to be that, at least for a few of them. So that vulnerability and modeling that for them in my writing and in my, thinking about this world that we're all trying to be human in, is a really powerful way to accomplish that.
I love that. I mean, we're all figuring this out together.
Mhm.
There is not an expert, and you guys are as close to it because you are doing it on the front lines. Hamsa, how are you thinking about? You're like, I just got finished with this semester, but how are you thinking about when coming back and rallying, and what is the sort of big next turn or pivot?
Yeah, I think Christina really hit the nail on the head. I think one of the challenges has been that everybody has a different opinion on this, as they should, because it's early days and we don't know what's going on. And so everyone's taking different bets. But I had a funny story where one of our colleagues in the computer science department, I think, said that students were not allowed to use ChatGPT on their assignment. And some students got like really upset and started calling them like Luddites and like, why aren't you keeping with the technology? You don't understand my learning process. And I think it's a real risk, right? Like, no matter how you do things, like someone is going to be upset because they have a very different perspective on what learning is. And the other challenge is, we like perception of learning is not the same as actual learning. We talked about this earlier about the struggle. Often students feel, and I mean, I shouldn't say students, like for myself, it's true that, I go to a seminar, I go to a talk, I listen to the whole thing, and I'm like, yeah, that was a great talk. I understood everything and I could totally do this. And then I sit down with pen and paper and I'm nothing. Like, there are so many things that I'm actually confused about. And I think that's just human. We tend to be a little overconfident. And so that's also challenging. Like, how do you convince a student that when they think they've learned something that they haven't and they need to put more effort and they need to struggle and make mistakes, especially when they're so overcommitted? So I think everyone just has to kind of make their best effort of what seems to work for their school and for their class, and then exchange best practices. And I don't really see any other way forward. What I worry about more is like what Christina said, like people who don't want to get with the times, want to keep the same curriculum. Like that's not going to work anymore. I think that's become evident.
Yeah, it's here, right? It's inevitable. It is part of being human now. Part of being human, both of, I hope it's okay. Both of you are mothers. Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, you're both mothers. I'm a mother. Um, and you also have to deal with your children, your kids that are also going through their own educational process. And are they getting out what we want that, what you want them to get out? It's a scary time to read headlines. It's like, okay, we don't know what's happening with education. It's killing it. And then also the jobs. There aren't any jobs. So how do you sort of think about that, and what maybe just like a spot of advice or just any kind of your own experience around that?
Okay. I feel like it's a hard time for parents.
Mm.
I think it's not different from prior technologies, I think. Like when social media became a thing or cell phones became a thing in school, there were harmful effects. We're still understanding them now. And I think parents did react to them very differently. Some parents were very strict about, no screen time, no phones at dinner. We need to engage in meaningful conversations. You need to do your homework without these tools. I think it's going to be challenging for parents to navigate this because we haven't reached an equilibrium yet. And so they'll have to figure that out, right? And I think there's also some warranted unhappiness, especially when you send kids to private schools like, UPenn. They're paying a lot of money per year. And then they find out that their kid is, just copying all their assignments off of ChatGPT and maybe not learning too much. And now there's pushback, not necessarily at UPenn, but like that teachers are starting to use these to grade homeworks. We have fewer students coming to office hours because they just ask ChatGPT for help. So, there are
Ooh.
all these questions and, warranted resentment about, whether these existing structures are providing for us in the way that they should. And I think that will change and, things will get better. But there's going to be this period, this crux, this period of change. And I think it's similar to what happened with cell phones or social media that, parents have to be vigilant. Unfortunately, I hate asking more of moms because they
Mm.
already have a lot going on. But vigilant to make sure that, kids are engaging, that they're actually interested. They maintain all the things Kristina said, maintain their curiosity and want to learn. I think that's the main thing we want in our kids, right? To love learning for the sake of learning.
Yes, and to be curious about something, whatever that something is. Sometimes in my trainings, we talk about how kids can only really listen for the length of a song. And then they zone out for a minute and then they come back in. And, even if I'm putting on a dog and pony show, they're not necessarily attending to that. So, trying to reach that flow state in whatever that flow state is what I try and do with both my students and my kids. We have 10 minutes of reading and an actual novel every day in my class, and we have 20 minutes of reading every night. And my boys are 10 and 6, and they rotate who has to read to who out loud. And I love whatever they're reading. They're reading some cat wad nonsense right now, but they love it. And it's a graphic novel and they make voices and it's awesome. And so if your kids like graphic novels, that's amazing. If your kids like audiobooks, I listen to audiobooks that I would be embarrassed to share with you right now because I love audiobooks. But I'm a teacher and I should be listening to Chaucer or something, and I'm not. I'm
No,
listening
and
to
we
Frida
do want to
McFadden,
we
and
do
she's
want to know
awesome.
what you're listening to, actually. We do actually want to know that.
It's a Frida McFadden book right now. But students love her, and I always think I'm going to figure out who murdered who, and I never do.
I just want to thank you both for sharing very openly. You're out there doing it. We're all talking about it theoretically. You're doing it, and an appreciation for the learning, and in whatever format that comes, and whatever new technology unveils itself, that we have to sort of form around that. And I generally am pretty optimistic about our ability to figure this out. We've been figuring it out, but it is a journey. And I'd love to have you guys back and check in. My takeaway is that I'm not sure we should all be as panicked. I mean, there's panic to be had for a lot of very, very good reasons. But what both of you ladies are out there doing feels like that there could be some new ways to develop that curiosity, which is what we want. The Intersect is distributed exclusively by our partner, Dear Media. Today's episode was produced by Sarah Singer, our showrunner, and myself, along with technical production by Chad Perisman and coordination by Haley Duffy and Dana Binfet. Caitlin Durkin, an executive producer on the show, oversaw communications, with original show music by Tom Peel. And if you liked our show today, please subscribe right here, wherever you are watching or listening. And we'll be back next week, right here at The Intersect.